Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem. So now continuing, not moving on to, with the Mubtad'a and Khabar. And there's a few rules we want to discuss today. Okay. The first rule is what can become a Khabar. So what he's explaining, I'll explain the text later on. You have to understand there are two things, they're not two things, but all words can be categorized into two categories. One is called the That, and one is called Arz. Or one is called That, or one is called Ma'na. So Ma'na, you would call this abstract. Okay? And this can be called something called concrete. Concrete is another word for this. Concrete, tangible. Something you can touch, see, an abstract or intangible. Okay? Can you see a book? That's concrete, tangible. Can you see a desk, pen, computer? Yes? And then you have something called ard. It's ismul ma'na, meaning things which you can't abstract. For example, ilm, knowledge, wisdom. So you can say these become the mubtada. Okay? And obviously you have a khabar. But if the khabar is a zarf, either zarf zaman or zarf makan. So for example, it can be a normal noun, that's not a problem. But if the khabar of a that and a ma'na is a zarf, then you can't have any combination. He's saying here, ar-rajul. Can you have ar-rajulu amamaka? Would that make sense? Yeah. Okay, let's start from the bottom. Can we have al-ilmu amamaka?
You will not be able to do this. Walau harastu. The walau harastu, even though you desire.
We could. Knowledge is in front of you, knowledge is behind of you. Again, yeah, it would probably mean in front of you in terms of. Again, you can't argue. I mean, you can argue both ways. So this is obvious. Yes, there's no question mark there. He's saying here, if you have like a abstract, you can also have a makan for it. So for example, knowledge is in front of you. But then here, even this will be asbabul ilm, the causes or the means of knowledge. This is what they mentioned in the book. So this is a question mark. Okay. If you can say al-ilmu al-yawm. But can you say al-rajulu al-yawm? Al-rajulu al-yawm. The man is today. It wouldn't make sense. So basically, this is what there is in the books, and you can always argue for all of this. So don't worry too much about this. What he's trying to say is sometimes when you get a scenario where the khabar is a zarf, and you analyze it, it doesn't make perfect sense. Something is mahdhuf, it's muta'awwal. So he's saying here, for example, if you have a that, like for example, al-hilal. Hilal is a mubtada mu'akhar. Yes? And the khabar muqaddam is al-layla. What is that? So this is the that, and this is the yukhb, and then this is the zaman. This doesn't make sense. Can you have the hilal is tonight? I.e., what does it mean hilal is tonight? It means what? The time of the hilal, seeing the hilal, sighting the hilal, the rising of the hilal, the rising of the new moon. So he's saying here that if you cannot give a that, make the that the mubtada and the khabar, which is the zarf, zaman, the khabar. It wouldn't make sense. If you do have that, it's muta'awwal. You will say basically, al-layla, tonight, is tulu'ul hilal. Okay? And the tulu' is abstract, and that is permissible. Okay? So again, even here you can argue. If you start arguing and start trying to understand it, it'll get too philosophical, and it's not really much of a difference. When you do see something where it doesn't really make sense, or you think, hey, how does it make sense? It's muta'awwal. It's something hidden and mahzuf. Okay? Do you understand what he's trying to say? Yes? So if you have a certain scenario where the zarf is a khabar of a solid thing, then you probably have a ta'wil. So if you say, for example, ar-rajulu al-yawm, it would mean, for example, buruzur rajul. The man became apparent to you, the man becoming apparent. Or the man's manifestation, or the man's characteristics became apparent. Something like that. So if I say, for example, ar-rajulu al-yawm, Does that really make sense on its own? So we have to say, well, muta'awwal is ta'wil in this, and you understand the ta'wil from the context. Understood?
Others have said it should translate to love
Okay. Now, this is a very easy masala. This is a bit of attention. What he's saying here is normally you have a mubtada, and every time you have a mubtada, what must we have?
What you do is you don't give this
Khabar. Is every time you have bread, you must have what? Butter. Yes? So mubtada and khabar are like bread and butter. They always go together. Yes? However, what we're discussing here is there's a scenario where you have a mubtada and you don't necessarily need a khabar. The khabar, you don't have a khabar. The khabar is understood from the context. So for example, what's the condition? You have an istifham, or you can have a nafi as well. But in our example from the Quran, we have a istifham. Okay? Then after that, you have a wasf. And what does wasf mean? Wasilatul wasfi al. Sorry, wasilatu al wasf. What does wasf mean? Yes, but what does it mean here when we came before? Yeah, so sila is, we say the sila of the alif lam is what? Yeah. The ismul fa'il or the ismul maf'ul. So if you have an ismul fa'il or an ismul maf'ul, which comes after the istifham. Yes? Which comes after the istifham. Yes? Then what happens? We say that the ismul fa'il and the ismul maf'ul, with this awamil before, this is shibhul fa'il, ma'na al-fa'il, isn't it? This becomes the fa'il of this. Anta becomes the fa'il of what? The raghib. Correct? Are you following me? So if you have an istifham, here, istifham, followed by a was. And was means what? Ismul fa'il or ismul maf'ul. And then you have a marfu. This marfu can become the fa'il of this. Do you understand? And that, we would say this fa'il, this marfu, this fa'il, which becomes the marfu, or if it's na'ibul fa'il, can be na'ibul fa'il as well. So the marfu, whether it's fa'il or na'ibul fa'il. That sadda, you say here, blocks or takes. And masadda means the space or the place of the khabar. Yes? So let's repeat again. If you have an istifham followed by an ismul fa'il or ismul maf'ul, and that has a marfu after it, apparent. A marfu is going to be seen after it, zahir. Then that fa'il, that becomes the fa'il of the wasf. And there's no khabar. We would say that the fa'il takes the place of the khabar. Do you understand? Afahimun antum. What does that mean? Afahimun antum. Are you understanding? And what's happening here? What is Hamza? Istifham followed by what? Which wasf is it here? So antum becomes what? The fa'il of the ismul fa'il. And this fa'il does what? It takes the place. Sadda. Say after me, sadda. Sadda masadda al-khabari. And there is no need for a khabar. This takes the place of the khabar. And what would, when I say afahimun antum, you would reply ma mafhumun ad-darsu. What does that mean? Now you say the lesson is not understood. What is ma? Nafyun. Mafhumun is what? Is wasfun. What kind of wasf is it?
go to bend the way you
Ismun maf'ul. Ad-dars become what? Got you. Set you up. It becomes what?
Understand? We've been created from so loud.
Yeah, naibul fa'il.
Created from so
It becomes the naibul fa'ili. Yes, it becomes the naibul fa'il. So ma mafhumun ad-dars. And this marfu' does what? Say, what's the word?
our understanding. So,
Sadda.
so Adam alayhi salam's mode was created.
It takes the place of the khabar. Sadda masad al-khabari. Understood what's happening? If you have an istifham or you have a negative, then followed by an was. And was means ismul fa'il or ismul maf'ul. And that is followed by a marfu. Then that marfu becomes the fa'il or na'ibul fa'il of the was. And it also becomes saddun or sadda masad al-khabari. And there is no need for a khabar.
No, so then obviously when you create it from the mode,
The fahimun becomes the mubtada and the fa'il is qa'imun maqam al-khabari or sadda masad al-khabari, saddun masad al-khabari. It takes the place of the khabar. Do you understand the mas'ala? Yes. Now how do we translate this? Yughni. What does ghaniyun mean?
if you try to straighten it, you're going to break it and break it.
Well, rich. Because why? When you're rich, you're independent. Huwal ghani. Allah is the most independent. So He doesn't need anybody. He will ghani wa antumul fuqara. We need him for everything. So he's a ghani. So aghna, to make somebody independent or rich. So it's not about being rich, it's about being independent and not in need. So if you're a multi-millionaire and you still need millions of pounds to pay your debts off, then you're not really rich. And if you don't have much money, but you don't need anything, then you're well off. So aghna, so you have aghna. So for example, aghna Allahu fulanan anil mali. For example. So you have a maf'ul bihi, then you have an, the thing from which you become independent of. So aghna Allahu fulanan anil mali. Allah made so and so independent of wealth. So now we have here, yughni is the fa'il, and then this is the fa'il, and this is the thing that is now no longer needed. So Allah made him independent of mal, not in need of wealth. So the marfu'u wasfin mu'tamidin ala istifhamin aw nafyin makes what? What's the maf'ul bihi? Al-mubtada'a. Makes the mubtada independent, not in need of a khabar. Do you understand? I'll translate this. I'll translate the fa'il later on. But the marfu', let's translate the marfu' for now. Or that sentence, that thingamajiggy, it makes the mubtada independent of a khabar. Do you understand so far how I've translated it? That thingamajiggy makes the mubtada independent of a khabar. Do you understand that translation so far? What's the thingamajiggy? The marfu' of a was.
What we have to understand
Yes?
is that women have this.
Marfu' of a was. So the marfu' of a was makes the mubtada independent of a khabar. But what kind of was?
What do you mean? We don't have this. Men have this.
Let me just, a rule of thumb. What do we do in idhan? What came after idhan? What was the condition of idhan? It must be what? Directly, and also it must be beginning of a sentence, musaddara. The semi-opposite, or kind of opposite of musaddara is i'timad. So musaddara means he comes at the beginning, and i'timad means it comes after something else. It doesn't come at the beginning, it comes after the mubtada, it comes after istifham, it comes after nafi. So the opposite of musaddara is kind of what? I'timad. So mu'tamid is the opposite of what? Musaddar. So if it's musaddar, it can't be mu'tamid. If it's mu'tamid, it can't be musaddar. Meaning it comes after. So mu'tamid, we translate it here as what? Which comes after. So wasfin, a wasfun which comes after. It literally means to lean. I'tamada is to lean on something. So which leans on or comes after. So, what we have here, the marfu of an ismul fa'il or an ismul maf'ul, that's this meaning. The ismul fa'il or the ismul maf'ul's marfu'. Sorry, the marfu of an ismul fa'il of an ismul maf'ul, which comes after an istifham or nafi, can make a mubtada independent of a khabar.
You try to straighten out every
Do you understand?
thing which you do not like in a person. Forget men.
Yes, which comes after an interrogative or a negative. So one more time. The marfu of an ismul fa'il or a maf'ul, which comes after a istifham or nafi, makes the mubtada independent of the khabar. Do you understand that? What he's explained the text? You don't need it. When you become independent of something, you don't need it anymore. I'm independent. You're independent of harakat. You don't need harakat to read anymore. You can understand the Arabic text without harakat. I'm independent of my parents' income, for example. You're not independent of my parents' dua, etc. But let's say start earning now. You said, I'm independent of my parents. I don't need to ask them for money anymore. I earn for myself and I'm independent of them in this aspect, financially. So independent, you don't need it anymore.
I don't like
Yes?
crookedness.
In your eyes,
Yeah.
is it in your eyes? The crookedness in your eyes?
Because
In reality,
Because of what? What makes it independent? Say, I'll be your buddy, mate. Forget khabar. I'm your new best friend.
so in every person,
Yes?
wow, I don't like this, but she does this.
You don't say khabar. So this marfu' says, forget khabar. I'll do the job for you. Do you understand? Now let's apply it. أقاتل قوم سلمى. One example. وما مدروب الأمران. How do you apply it here? Who's going to apply it in here? أقاتل قوم سلمى.
Why is this crookedness inside them?
What's Hamza?
What does it mean repetitive?
Istifham.
You know, you spend the night
Istifham followed by in. What kind of was is it?
nikahan.
Ismul fa'il. Does the ismul fa'il have a marfu after it? Marfu'ul wasfi. So explain, tell me, who is making what independent of what? And say the words.
You have to be very careful. The Prophet Allah is spoken
The
to the men, advising men.
qatinun, not qatinun. The marfu of the wasf. Qatinun is the wasf. So don't say marfu. Tell me which word exactly. No. Yeah, because qawmu salma is the marfu of qatinun. So qawmu salma is making what? Which is? Independent of what? So qawmu salma is the marfu of the was that is making qatinun independent of a khabar. We say qatinun doesn't need a khabar. The qawmu salma will do the job of the khabar. Do you understand? Who's going to do next one? Somebody else?
I mean, anyway,
Come on, quickly.
you just need to be married for 1 month. This experience will come straight.
Come on. Go ahead. And madrubun is?
If someone tells me,
It's a was, ismul maf'ul.
every single time,
And then what do we have after it?
I'll say what? If someone tells me,
Which is what? In this example becomes what?
you see, we're leaving at this time, they're ready at that time.
No, it becomes a marfu, the na'ibul fa'il. Yes? So amran is a na'ibul fa'il of madrubun. Amran is what? Na'ibul fa'il of madrubun. Okay? So talk me through it. What's making what independent of what?
Questions, next step.
Amran is making
رضي الله عنه.
madrubun
النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يخطب.
of a khabar. So you say madrubun is a mubtada.
رسول الله صلى الله
Amran is the fa'il of madrubun, not fa'il. Sorry, I got stuck again. I got tricked myself. Is a na'ibul fa'il of what? Madrubun. And this na'ibul fa'il does what? You say here sadda or ismul fa'il sadun. It is taking the place of what's the maf'ul bihi or maf'ul fi? It's taking the place sadun masaddal khabari. Do you understand?
and the person who killed
Does everybody understand this mas'ala?
فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم رسول الله
Yes?
like this is what Allah says in the Quran.
Okay. Next to masala, piece of cake. وقد يتعدد الخبر. تعدد يتعدد to be multiple. So one mubtada can have multiple khabar. So the khabar can be multiple many. For example, وهو الغفور الودود ذو العرش المجيد فعال لما يريد. So multiple khabar. And remember, having a waw in between, waw al-atf doesn't make it multiple khabar. Multiple khabar means khabar 1, khabar 2 without a harf al-atf in between. If a harf al-atf comes in between, then that's not called multiple. So example, you can't have multiple fa'il. You can have multiple fa'il, i.e. one fa'il and many ma'tuf on that fa'il. But only one fa'il is slot. But you can have multiple khabar, khabar 1, khabar 2, etc. Okay? Understood? Are you following? Yes? وَقَدْ يَتَقَدَّمُ أي الخبر. And sometimes the khabar can come before the mubtada. So فِي الدَّارِ زَيْدٌ. Here it is, فِي الدَّارِ is a jar majroor. That becomes what is zarfun mustaqar. Yes? And the zarf mustaqar becomes the khabar muqaddam of Zayd. And ayna Zaydun, ayna becomes the khabar muqaddam. And Zaydun is mubtada'un mu'akharun. Yes, you following? Ism mu'akhar. Why ism mu'akhar?
Goes to his wife.
Yeah. You got it? Okay. Should we stop here then today, inshallah? Okay. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, wa nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, wa nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.